Welcome to the Up Arrow Podcast with William Harris, featuring top business leaders sharing strategies and resources to get to the next level. Now, let's get started with the show.
Hey everyone, I'm William Harris. I'm the founder and CEO of Element and the host of the Up Arrow Podcast, where I feature the best minds in e-commerce to help you scale from 10 million to 100 million plus. I'm excited about the guest that I have here today, Nicholas Weiksner. After time working on Wall Street, Nick has gone on to fund multiple high-growth companies. Before founding South Col, he was the CFO of SellersFunding. South Col joins forces with e-com entrepreneurs to scale their companies for a dream high-value exit in 18 to 24 months. Nick, it's really great to have you on the show.
Thank you for having me. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah. So I do want to do a quick announcement of our sponsor, and then we'll get into the good stuff. This episode is brought to you by Element. Element is an award-winning advertising agency optimizing e-commerce campaigns around profit. In fact, we've helped 13 of our customers get acquired, with the largest one selling for nearly $800 million, and one that IPO'd recently. You can learn more on our website at element.com, which is spelled ELUMYNT.com. That's enough of that. Let's get on to the good stuff. You were with Bear Stearns, then the 49ers, CFO. There's so much to your past. How did you go from all of that to where you are now? What's the story?
Well, I mean, the basic thing is I think I followed my passion everywhere I went. So it is a winding road, but it actually all makes sense if you're crazy enough to put it all together. But the easiest way to understand it is I've always had a passion for growing companies, for the challenges. It probably dates back to, athletics have been a big part of my life. That in athletics, you really have to work a lot on yourself, like by yourself, with no one watching, if you want to be able to perform when the lights are on and when it matters. And I look at growing companies a lot that way, that like when you're there and in it, you've got to do a lot of stuff that sometimes is just mucking out the stable, and it's not cool and it's not trendy, but you need to do it because that's what gets you all the other stuff. And I love the team aspect of it, because I've yet to see a company that doesn't succeed because of there can be a great leader at the top, and he or she can be a North Star that everyone's following, which is great. But I always see that those people attract great teams, that people bring and their talents are exercised and they work well together and they support each other. And it's, for us, especially at South Col, because of the depth of our relationship, we actually have a screening that we look at entrepreneurs on, like a 40-question sort of matrix that we sort of look at as a partnership group, because we realize that we're going to get married to this company, and we want to make sure that they align with us on a lot of things outside of business.
Yeah,
because
that's smart. The
world is bigger than just am I going to make more money on this? Which, not that that's very important too, but there's more to the world.
There really is. I appreciated you talking about just that idea of being competitive and driven in athletics and where that's gone, and having to put in the work by yourself. It reminds me of a quote from Usain Bolt, where he said something along the lines of like, I've practiced for 4 years to run 9 seconds. And I love that quote because it's so good. We're so narrow-minded, myopic sometimes in growth, and we were saying, I implemented this new strategy a week ago and it's not hitting yet. Give it some time.
That's right. You have to understand it, and that's where you have to set the right expectations. Like when we do things, we always want to lay out, like, where are you going to see it? When is it going to come? Yeah. Like, things don't happen overnight, and every company I've looked at, especially the really successful ones, they churned out. Let's take it easy. Amazon, man. Amazon spent a decade building where it was unloved for a long time, and then the point was Jeff Bezos was just grinding and just working. He knew where he was going, and it took a while for the rest of the world to catch up to how far ahead he was of everybody else.
Absolutely. Well, let's get into the meat of this then. Yeah. Let's imagine that you are a $10 to $30 million e-commerce company, and you want to be acquired. What are the biggest things that they need to know?
Well, it's funny. So as a CFO, people think that I'm biased in this regard, but a lot of times, super successful entrepreneurs, accounting's not sexy. That's one of these mucking out the stables parts of this, that very few entrepreneurs are like, what makes me excited? Accounting. Like, I live and breathe it, and yes, I get to do the books. Psyched. And so I totally understand it because I get it. Like it's not, but it's interesting. I say that there's a lot that drives out of it, which is number one. We think the number one thing is every single thing you sell, you need to know exactly what that cost fully landed to your customer. So that you understand that on a transaction basis, every time you give them a widget, how much money is coming back to you to pay for your overhead and everything else, not directly associated with the cost of delivering that widget to the customer. And sometimes I go, companies are like, well, I have, 10,000 SKUs. Well, okay, like you can't know 10,000 of those numbers, but you got to know the top ones, the ones that are driving the business. And you should have somebody who knows all of them so that you're smartly going, why are we doing this? Like if there's a reason, but then we have to know the reason. Let's speak it. Let's talk it out.
Yeah.
Go, we have this widget that loses us 10 cents every time we sell it, but we do it because it brings in this $5 sale that makes us money, right? I get it. But we should always know, so we're not just presuming it's such. We should say, look, and then let's test it out. Let's see what happens if we do some ads or push some people in where they don't see this. Do we still make that sale? Like sometimes we constrain our logic to go, it must be this because this is the way I've always thought of it. Where I'm big into having people I think it goes back to I don't know if anyone, Team of Rivals, right? Doris Kearns Goodwin wrote about Abraham Lincoln, right? Brought in a cabinet of people who disagreed with him. And I'm a big fan of saying, I don't want us to agree. I want us to talk and intellectually, respectfully say, ask questions. Go, why? Why is it that you believe X? Can we show it in the numbers? So we're going to circle back to accounting because every time I ask a question, I go, show it to me in the numbers. Show me where sales increased because you did that ad. Show me where customer acquisition went up. When here I see your recurring customer number is declining, it means you're losing customers. So let's sort of drill into every number and go, what is it telling us? What is that number telling us? And if you don't like what it's telling us, how do we change it? Let's talk about solution-based because I'm huge into let's identify a problem, then let's identify the solution to that problem. And sometimes you need to run tests. You have to let's try 3 things and see which one works better. And then sometimes you don't have that choice, right? Like if you have a choice of to either launch product A or product B, sometimes you don't have a choice to do both. So then you have to have a team that discusses it, but then everybody agrees and moves forward. Because if you can't go back and do it a different way, don't waste energy. Like whether it was your choice or someone else's choice, just let's deal with today's problem and it'll sort itself out. Because I always tell people, every closing dinner I've been at where we've sold the company, all we do is laugh about disagreements. The only time disagreements matter is if we don't win. So if we all just focus on what winning looks like, we get to that closing dinner where we laugh about all the times where you wanted to launch into Target and I wanted to launch into Walmart and, whatever. I mean, whichever way it went is the way it went. But when you win, it washes it all away. And so to me, it's focused on all my energy. Does this make me win? Is this going to help the company win?
Yeah.
And if it's not, let's not bother.
Yeah. And I think what you brought up about the idea of SKU level understanding of what's going on in the business is very smart. We actually approach advertising from that perspective as well. Now, this doesn't make sense for every business. Some people only have, a handful of SKUs, but for large businesses, there are a lot of times that we see people with, 70,000 SKUs and they have no clue whether some of these are profitable to them or not. So we actually optimize the campaigns for them around which ones have the better margins versus just which ones have the higher sell-through rates. Because you might have a higher return on ad spend, a higher ROAS, but a lower EBITDA. And so we're saying, wait a minute, how do we actually optimize these campaigns in a way that drives the most bottom line, even if it means potentially lower top line? Although we don't want that either. We want both to go up. But if we had to make a sacrifice on one, we're trying to figure out how do we make sure that the profitability is there.
That's right. And it's funny you say that because I always say that because we had this argument with discussion with a portfolio company where we realized that there was something they had to get rid of, which is going to lower their sales. Like obviously when you get rid of something that produced 10% of your sales, that's painful because you're talking a 10% deficit off that bat, right? But by doing it, even if we didn't replace that sales, it was more profitable. And I said, then we can use the more that profit we're generating that now is bigger into growth initiatives that will be profitable and bigger, but you have to have a horizon that's beyond next month, which then also says, because in my past life, when I ran my private equity firm, Mooring Edge, one of the roles I played was I had been an operator. So I'd run a chain of retail stores. And I'd been an investor where I invested and I sat on boards and invested. They're different perspectives, right? Because investors just want the profit. Operators are working in the real world. And I kind of sat between them where I could communicate to the investors, hey, in the real world, Joe's going through a divorce. Sally's having something happen at home. Sure. Things are difficult. They're going to get through it. Or I have to be the investor and go, hey, bud, I've run a company. You're leaning too heavily into the world is messy. You've got to own up. You got to hit your numbers. Like you've got to go do it. Like, come on. And sort of that medium where both sides trusted me because I could empathize directly with what their concerns were. And then what I found is it made it come again. We came to better outputs because both sides have a point. Like neither one is wrong. It's just, it's not holistic, which is both sides really have their own value and there's times for either one. And the hard part is knowing when it is because investors are just like, I'll tell you what it is. I've got 30 of these. I'm just going to whip. And the ones that fall down. And the ones that respond, great. And I say, well, let's take a little more nuanced view because I wouldn't want my entrepreneur to take that view of like, this is what I'm just going to do. So, it's interesting. But again, it all goes back to quantifying this ability. Like, here's another easy example. So a good friend of mine, John Abamondi, had worked at Major League Baseball, and then he became the assistant GM of the St. Louis Cardinals. And I went to St. Louis all the time, love baseball, right? So I went to St. Louis all the time, and I would sit with John Moselak, Mo, who's the GM, and my buddy Abamondi, and their discussions where Abamondi is data driven. He, at Stanford Business School, we came out together, and like he basically was like, if it can't be expressed in this formulaic, it doesn't exist. And then Mo came up as the scout. In fact, he's the scout that found Albert Pujols, one of the inner ring Hall of Famers, who was drafted in the late 20th round. So he kind of found him. And so it wasn't through numbers in this, it was through his ability to spot eye-hand coordination, right? Through visual, subjective intake. And they were very much confrontational. And again, it kind of like I laughed because I was working at Mooring Edge. I'm like, I feel like I'm sitting between these two groups again where I'm trying to translate back and forth, which is like, John, to Abamondi, look, like Jeter did help the Yankees. We can agree that he was a weak shortstop, weaker than he is considered in the Hall of Fame as a huge Yankee fan. He's right behind me. But he helped elevate all the players on the team. And you can't quantify what it means that every player showed up 15 minutes early to practice, ready to practice, not messing around. I can't put that in a spreadsheet. But I agree with you that a lot of things can. So I would push back and go, Mo, everything isn't just what we see. Billy Beane was a 5-star, 5-tool recruit and amounted to nothing, never got out of the minors. And so the point is both have a point. And the answer is, what I go to is say, how about we take a little bit of the middle ground, which is we should be able to quantify it. And if we can't, every once in a while, that's okay. But if I hear you saying that about everything, then I go, you know what? Let's find like 80% of stuff should be able to show up in a number. Yeah. And if you've got a couple of things that can't, then cool.
So a couple of things that you've talked about before with me in other calls that are maybe harder to quantify in numbers, but are really important for these brands to think about would be what the future is, right? So you told me before, it's like they need to know what drives their business, why they're successful, and what the future of their business is. And sometimes when you're thinking about the future, you can go very simplistic about like what the future is for the business, or you can get very complex. And sometimes the complex ends up being more wrong than the simplistic answer. But like, what are you looking for when you're trying to determine the future of a business?
That's a great, I love that, because that's where it's the art and science, right? We're circling around the same sort of thing, art and science, and which is which. I would say that when we look at a company, the first thing that I sort on, and it may or may not be right, is we look for a very specific type of entrepreneur. And the way I do it is I give a very good example of the one we're not looking for is Steve Jobs. So Steve Jobs, come on, you can't say he's anything less than unbelievable, right? He's not going to be where we're going to have a fruitful working relationship because he is an idiosyncratic genius, and he is going to do really, really well or flame out or both multiple times. Sure. That's what he's going to do. And so we actually sort into what I call the person who is open and receptive to simultaneously being confident. So I don't want a CEO, I don't want him or her to go, just tell me what you want me to do. Okay, no. Okay, I don't like that, because you want someone who's like, no, I know this business. I know my customer. I know what it is. I know what I want to do. But somebody who, when you present them contrary information, their reaction isn't to dismiss it. Their reaction is to try to understand it, try to reframe it, try to recalibrate it, because, it's sometimes you need to understand, I believe, the entrepreneurs we work with, I start from the premise they know 50 billion times more about their business than I do. And so that's the information difference. But I can look at numbers and go, why aren't these numbers reflective of what you're saying? And then open to learning where it is, because sometimes that's where the opportunity lies. Sometimes that's where, there was one company I worked with, and she's like, my customers love my good. And I said, okay, but it's not showing up in this. And what we realized is where the disconnect was, she was mispricing her goods way low. We actually went and we doubled the price, no changes.
Wow.
Her sales continued where they were to slightly up. So you can't say that we lost sales. And the point was, it was because she was right. Her customers loved her good, but what was missing was she hadn't thought of the fact that she was pricing it just based off what she had paid for it, which actually isn't the way you should think about it. It's the value to somebody else. Somebody else was saying, I love this at 50 as much as I loved it at 25. And so as an entrepreneur, that's sort of where you want to sit, is you want to understand what drives it. And then the other thing for founders, when I ran my company, and it was a photography studio for families, upscale. So our average ticket was $350, right? So a decent ticket for coming in for a 45-minute session and all this. And I used to be able to walk the mall. We were in malls, right? I'm old enough that like we had actually mall-based businesses. And I would walk the mall and with my CFO, my partner, and he and I would go, okay, most of our buyers were mothers. I would spot someone, I'd be like, okay, I could tell how much she would spend. And like, I can guarantee you that they'd walk in the store, I would hit it 80% of the time, because it's not simplistic. It's not like, oh, they're wearing a Rolex, they're going to spend a lot. No. Sure. Actually, we had some discorrelation between expenditures. There's other things, and you have to know what you're looking for. So when I talk to a CEO, I always try to see, do they tell me the thing about their customer that's not obvious? That's not what anybody who looks at this, if you sell chocolate, I sell to people who like chocolate. Okay, well, cool. Instead of like going, I sell to 20 to 30-year-olds who like small batch chocolate because it adheres to their, whatever the answer is. I want a CEO who like visualizes what their customer looks like as an avatar, as a general rule. Because again, like you guys, you work with media, right? Like then when you go to do your media buy, you go, look, here are the lookalikes we want. Yeah. Here's where we need to be. Don't be advertising if you're trying to reach, my wife teases me, right? I play fantasy baseball, right? Which does not make me cool, right? Got it. But like, you don't want to advertise for fantasy baseball in a community that doesn't like sports, right?
Sure.
Why would you do that? You want to find these sort of middle-aged men who don't have anything better to do. Like, okay, got it. Like, there's my target. And then at the same time, you don't want to leave people out. Because like another one that I always hit on is like, my wife's a huge football fan, and it bothers her to no end that people think only people that watch football are this. Sure. Of which then I tell her, well, the reason is the wider market is the 18 to 40-year-old men. You're in a narrower market, but even football's gotten smarter because now you can buy narrower segment market, and you actually can go down and drill down and then hit these avid fans that are smaller but deeper. So you want to know both, and you want to sort of. I always like a CEO who just lives and breathes the business to the point that that's how they think of it in these minutiae. That the ones that are, the ones that I stay away from are the ones that are like, well, I don't, I'm very hands off. Sales is done by Sally, accounting is done by Joe. Like, no, man, like it's, I don't know. The other example, like this is another. So at SellersFunding, right, we do loans to companies, right, and thousands a year. Ricardo, the CEO, the founder, still signs every single loan that goes out. He looks at it, sees how much it is, and signs it. And I cannot tell you how many investors that were going, Ricardo, why do you do this? He goes, because I am responsible for every one of these loans, and I want to know where they're going out. Now, obviously, we have a team, and like it's not that like he's reviewing the numbers behind all this. It's just he's watching what that is, and he has an ability to pull them at a ridiculous rate, at a rate that you bring up someone's like, oh, I remember that. That was a week ago. I got he's
which helps,
right? Because all of a sudden, to me, it eliminates a lot of like future problems. Because like somebody comes and everybody in every job has their own self-interest, and then they're trying to spin it the way that's best for them. But if you have a little bit more information, you can sometimes go, well, let's unwind this a little bit more. Yeah.
So this is a good segue into something else you told me about that's important for these founders, which is focus, where sometimes they get caught up in too many of the wrong initiatives for their business. And there is that line between having that personalization, but then figuring out what are those initiatives that are going to drive good revenue for you. When you're talking about focus to founders who are looking to exit, what are the things that you're talking about?
That's great. And it's exactly, I know exactly so we're looking at a company, right, that did 12 million in sales last year. We're going to do hopefully north of 20 this year, which awesome, right? Like that's from a bottom line, super great. In building up to that, I say to them, I go, okay, look, how are we getting there? We're going to create 9 million of revenue. If we're going to go to 21, from 12 to 21, 9 million of incremental new revenue. Where is it coming from? And so it's like, okay, we're going to do 2 million on the baseline business. We're going to grow it, 15%. Okay, I got it. That's reasonable. Maybe a little bit upside left there, but okay, got it. That's 2. We're launching this business. That's a subscription box-based business that we believe will do 4 million. Okay, great. That's a high focus. We're launching into this channel, which we've never been in before, selling on QVC. It's going to end up being 2.5 million. We're selling on Amazon and this and another 3 million. Okay. Then all of a sudden the CEO is talking to me and I'm like, those are big initiatives. So I have a belief in my very, very firmly held belief. We can be successful at 3 to 5 major initiatives. Any CEO, whatever man or woman is running it, I think it's 3 to 5. Otherwise you degrade results in the others. And it's very hard to disaggregate this because you have entrepreneurs who are like, I've done 50 things before, and I believe they have. But the hard part is you don't know if they would have been better off at doing 5, being very successful. Sure. It's hard to know. We don't get to do that. But I know that where we are, where it is, then the CEO started talking to me about this initiative. And I said, okay. I said, sounds great. I said, how much is revenue? And he's like, 500,000. And I said, if you spend an hour on this, I'm going to be upset because 500 is not moving the needle. We got these other initiatives that are building up to the 9 million for exit. Remember, we want to get there for exit. This 500, if you can't just give it to somebody else in the organization who doesn't have 500,000 of value that they're creating, this is an increase in whatever they were doing otherwise, and we don't lose anything else, degrade anywhere else, I'm okay with it. But if this is on your charter, I have to understand why. Like, why are we doing this if it's not going to do that? And it's because, again, entrepreneurs, they're just so passionate. They want to do everything. They see a need. They want to meet it, which is cool. Yeah. But like, my job sometimes is to rein them in a little bit. Just go, hey, I want you to work hard, but I want you to see your kids or go to the movies or go to the beach or whatever you like. But like, if you try to say you're doing all of this, you're going to lose all of that and maybe not do the others.
Yeah. Yeah. You've got to find that balance between the two so you can focus on the things that are driving the needle. And I see this even with brands that we work with all the time where, there's a push for an initiative that, or a test that isn't going to make much of a difference one way or another versus, and installing on other tests that are going to make big impacts. And I think sometimes the reason why we do this as human beings is because there's comfort in the simple things because we feel like, okay, great, I cross it off my list, right? So it's like one thing and it's one small thing, but like the other one feels maybe overwhelming or daunting. It's like, I'm not sure if I'm ready to do that yet. And so at least this is why I rationalize why sometimes, maybe even myself included, on certain initiatives, we're like, Friday, today I'm going to work on this one. This one I can knock off my list and that feels good.
That's right. That's right. It's the tyranny of the urgent versus the tyranny of the strategic, right? Which is, the other one that happens is you start doing this, all those little things have their little mini fire drills, right? Whatever initiative, right? I don't care whether it's like, that's another thing I've found. A $500,000 a year initiative and a $5 million initiative sometimes have 10% more work for the larger one. That the embedded amount of work of starting something, whether it's a lemonade stand for your kids out on the corner or a major, like, are kind of similar. And then what happens is you get the inevitable fire drill because something didn't go right in that. And then all of a sudden you're taking that phone call and not focused on exactly what you said, which is the thing that's going to actually sell your business for 60 million versus 40 million. Like, that should be that should be your focus. If I put it like that, most people would be like, oh yeah, of course, I'm going to focus on the thing that makes me 20 million. Okay, well, let's.
Right. Right. So you told me a story about Ace Greenberg when you were at Bear Stearns that kind of relates to the idea of focus and where you're putting that focus there. But tell us the story.
Absolutely. So first of all, again, this is going to show my age, which is, so when I came to Wall Street, fresh out of college, first job out of college, working at Bear Stearns, corporate finance analyst. And, we have the class of the 100, suit wearing, first job, all ready to go, work 100-hour weeks. Yep. And Ace introduces himself, and he's kind of this godfather of the company. He's an amazing trader. He was pretty old back then, but he still came to work. He was there before the market opened, there after the market opened, and still executing trades. And he gave each one of us a little paper bag, and one of the things inside of it was 3 paper clips and a note that said, we used to get paper memos back. This is paper. We had email and the internet existed, as my kids like to think. No, the internet existed. Right. There was email, but most stuff was done paper, especially deal-related memos. And, you print out your spreadsheets and people would look at them with pen and paper. So you'd get memos. And it said, when you get a memo, take the paper clip off. You have 3 to add to the system. If you're doing this, as long as by the time you send your 3rd memo, you've received a memo, which will happen, you don't need any more paper clips ever. So our supply store in the building doesn't have any paper clips. And the point of this is because if you're watching the paper clips, if you're thinking, I need to take the paper and do this, you're watching our money. And, it's the old adage, if you watch pennies, the nickels take care of themselves. And it stuck with me, which is, obviously it's a bit ridiculous, but I think it's intended to be ridiculous. But it's saying, sometimes lots of little things add up. Lots of, I'll just go ahead and do this anyway. It's better to,
Yeah.
if you think about the small things, the big things work out, I think. And I hold that still. And it's guided me a little bit for, 40 years later or whatever. So 30 years later.
Well, and I think, like you said, it gives you focus, right? So it's like, okay, if there's only 3, these got to go to 3 things that really matter, not all 30 things. And then your focus is divided and you're not really rowing in one direction. And it's, I'm just going to mix up a whole bunch of metaphors all at once here. But,
but then it works better.
Yeah, exactly. So if somebody's looking to get acquired, what are some roadblocks that you've seen them run into where you're saying, this is a dead stop or a red flag or whatever that might be, that you're like, you've got to get this sorted out and fixed, or you're just pause on the whole talk about acquisition?
So again, I'm sounding like I'm beating a horse, but I'm going to go back to what I said at the beginning, which is the most important thing of what we focus on, which is your numbers and your accounting. Because when you report numbers, we see companies that are in the 10 to 15, even 20 million and even above, whose accounting is what I would call B. It's mostly accrual. There's some stuff in there that they didn't think about that's a little bit cash based, and
Sure.
It's very good direction. So we're miles away from fraud. So everyone needs to understand when we're dealing with something, you get into the areas of fraud, which I've uncovered. I mean, anyone who's done due diligence on enough companies, I've found stuff that
Sure.
whether it was fraudulent or absolute incompetence, we just go away. That's like, good night. We don't need to talk anymore. I've got better things to do with my time. So we're talking about companies that are well run by honest people.
Mm-hmm.
But the numbers, I almost always can find fairly 5 to 10% numbers that can be moved. Sometimes it's because it's our choice of how you classify something. Sometimes it's, understanding what time periods things are happening in and where we should affect them. So those all will run the course, right? And it's okay. But when you come to South Col, one of the first things we do, we actually undertake getting them so that they're what I call A, which says they're pure accrual. Now you also have cash books. So you have both. So if someone wants to see your cash, because when you have accrual, it matches cash, and that's how it works. And all of your statements become very quickly exactly what they are. Because if you go back to what I said earlier about how we always look at the numbers, we're driving the business off of that. We're looking at what you're doing, because a lot of times businesses think a lot about the top line, which is great. Mm-hmm. As you're growing a business, top line matters a ton. When you're going to sell a business, a lot of times your bottom line is going to matter more. Now, some companies still are acquired on revenue multiples. It's less and less. We believe that the highest sales come from companies that are getting their EBITDA above 2 million, where you can start selling to real strategics. And I can get into why they pay a higher multiple, because it's not that they're stupid. There's a reason they pay higher multiples, but you want to get there. So they care about the bottom line, and your business should be driven off of it. So what I say is this is 100% circular, which is we need it to understand your business, so we're going to do it. Then we want it ongoing because we want it to help manage the business, for you to guide your business with it. And then when we go to sell, we sit down and we hand it to the people that are bidding on a prospective sale. They know those numbers are right. They can waste their time and try to find something, but they're not going to. And what that means is in their head, you're just going to get a higher multiple, because they just know I can look at this, trust it. I don't need to discount in my head a sloppy. And one example I told you about, which I can't say the name of the company, but when I was at Stearns, we're selling a company, and the company was going through, and $60 million acquisition. That was, the company was being acquired, and we were representing the selling companies. We were the company being acquired, and going through it, they found an accounting error, and the accounting error was not de minimis, but it existed. It was not fraudulent. It was a mistake. We corrected it, changed the multiple, which would have made the business sale at 58 million. And so, okay, so we're like, okay, we got it. So it's 58 million. The acquirer came back and said, no, we're only going to pay 53. And when asked why, they said, well, we found this. We understand there's not fraud, that we're buying the company and all this, but we're giving ourselves room because what is the error we didn't find? Because this one was pretty, we understand how it happened, all of that foots, but what if there's another one? And to me, I just took that lesson. I mean, it's just, and I've said to everyone, I said, you don't want that. Like, you don't want to be facing, now maybe it won't be that dramatic a change. Maybe it's $500,000, but whatever that number, that changes, it's way better to have somebody do it right. That's going to cost less. And then 2, there's always the binary. I've seen people walk away. And I think a lot of times when you dig into why they walked away because they saw something in the numbers that didn't work. And they made the decision, I have enough choices. I'm going to do one where I don't find it. So I really sort of say and then my last, and then I'll get off this high horse of accounting is it's easier to do when you're at 10, 15, 20 than when you're at 40, 50, 60. So let's do it now. Because once you get it right, it actually ongoing is just as easy as not being right. It just takes work to get it right. And I tell younger companies, do it when you're at 5 million or 6 million. And then be right when you come up and you're going to get a higher valuation for whatever transactions you're doing for that. And the other big one I think that it is moats for the business is for the CEO, he or she has got to be able to explain why their business isn't at risk at any moment of a copycat or a like business. I mean, I think you and I were laughing about this is in one of our times, which is every entrepreneur says they have no competitors. They always do the charts that are foursquare. They're upper right and everybody else is lower left.
Way up there.
Way up there. And I love that confidence. Like, it'd be cool. That's fun. But you got to be able to know who are your competitors and what differentiates you. It's okay to have competitors. You can be a great company. Lexus has Porsche, has whatever, right? There's more than one choice. And I always like when CEOs can say, here are my competitors, but here's what differentiates us. And, sometimes that's the only moat they have. Or I have another company we're in, they have a patent that actually protects the way that they do this service.
Huge.
And so I know for at least 10 years, it's a 10-year patent, that for 10 years, they can't copy exactly that. Now there's other ways to do that, but they can say, we're the only ones that do this. So there's different levels that you might have of protection. iPhone, right? They have a ton of patents on what an iPhone is. Now, other phone companies have produced smartphones, right? So always your moat's going to be a different size, and it's always good to be able to understand what that moat is. Both whether is it really, really wide, and if so, why? And if it's not, how do you succeed in that? Because we have another investment that's in a commodity business. So by definition, a commodity business, it's right there in the word, it's a commodity.
Right.
And so, but they're still differentiators and they still have moats that they do, but they're obviously operational, customer focused, packaging. Things that are you have to be very focused on. You can't lose the focus there on that.
So the more that you can clearly define these moats, the better your chances of being acquired are, potentially even increasing the multiple. You're talking about getting off your high horse of finances. I don't think I'm going to let you off of that yet, because you also called out the idea of why they pay better multiples when you get above 2 million in EBITDA. Let's talk about why you get a better multiple there. And then let's also talk about other ways that businesses can drive up and get better multiples on whatever they're trying to sell.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So number one, strategics are going to pay a higher multiple. And the easiest and most concise way to do it is saying strategics operate at a higher level. They're going to spend more money. They're going to be able to accomplish more. But what they need to know is the binary outcome of if this is something that will work. So let's just take an easy example of if you've got you have a handbag, right? And it's look, you show that your handbags are saleable to $10 million of sales for $2 million of EBITDA. a strategic comes along and goes, okay, I've got 1,000 stores. So I can come and overpay on the multiple, and I put it in air quotes, because I know that I can take this handbag, which I know passes the 1-0 binary of whether people want it, and then I can put it on all 1,000 store shelves, know that it sells. And if you take my overpayment by increased multiple and spread it on a per bag basis, it's $2 a bag. And I pay it back in the first year. And now I own your company, and I'm leveraging that brand where I add on a purse and a scarf that all of a sudden I'm able to broaden your brand. And now I'm making all of that back and then some. So I underpaid for it. And it isn't. The truth is just no, the market's efficient. The market's saying they can do that. You can't. You being the entrepreneur, me, you, whoever.
Sure.
We can't open up 1,000, or we could, I guess. Sorry, I'll take it back. We could, but it might take us 5-10 years. And they can do it and know they can do it instantly. Like, we had a company that we ended up not turning down. And one of the reasons was the entrepreneur said, I have the opportunity to launch in 2,000 targets. And that's amazing, right? I mean, it's really, really good. But the problem was he wasn't fully understanding that he wasn't ready to do that, that he was not going to be able to buy the inventory, have it. I mean, if he doesn't hit his sell-through rates and they push that all back onto him, he'll go under. Like, that's it. Like, there's no talking about it. There's no hey, how can we solve this? It's death. And we don't want to take a binary risk that's death. Whereas a strategic can open up 2,000 shelves at Target, and it's one of 10 risks, 20 risks they're doing. And if it doesn't work, they're not out of business. They're just, it's one of theirs that didn't work. And when you don't see that, you sort of, that's where, those are the big swings. Sometimes they're grand slams, and then sometimes they're strikeouts. And so it's a different perspective of what you want to do. But that's why they pay higher multiples and other ways. You said other ways to get higher multiples.
Well,
I would say,
so before we jump into some of the other ways here too, I mean, I've seen this happen in the publicly traded company space as well, where again, if they're acquiring somebody small, it doesn't really mean anything. But if they acquire somebody large enough, they're almost paid back within the day because their stocks trade up significantly as a result of that. So it makes sense on what you're saying. But yes, other ideas, other ways that people are able to build up their multiple. If you're smaller, 10 million, 30 million, you've got $1 million, 2 million in EBITDA. What are some other ways that they can increase that multiple?
I would say your customer engagement. So if you can show you have a true group where, I always say this, some companies are very effective at making their customers their friends. And when you can really sort of show that your customers love you because you're meeting a need that they have in a way that makes them happy, you're going to see it a number of ways. Besides, you're going to see it in repeat purchases, depending on, obviously, it has to be a consumable, right? I mean, so let's just assume we're dealing with something that's a consumer. It's like, okay, they're repeat purchases, they're advocating, they're on Facebook pages, interact with you, they're on your TikTok, they're creating. You have people who will go and create stuff around you. Like, I mean, the one that gets me is when I was at Stanford in 2000 2000, Apple was just hitting the iPod and was just sort of coming out. And I remember vividly being on University Avenue and walking up to an Apple store and a guy walking out, just a customer going, "Have you seen this thing? This is unbelievable. I've got 500 songs on here. It's the best thing ever." Right. And I was like, could you imagine being a company where your customers are out preaching the gospel of how good you are? And
they're
so
getting
when you can show
your
things,
logo tattooed on their body.
That's right. That's right. They put it on their car. Apple still does that today. It cracks me up, right? They give you that Apple sticker. I'm going to want to put on my car that I have an Apple product. It's a little hubris now, but I get it.
Yep.
But yes, you
Yeah.
want to
So,
see
okay. So customers. Yeah.
Yep. Customer engagement. Then I would say another big one is for us, we feel strong is like the more, if you're in a business where subscription can be there, subscriptions are great, right? Recurring revenue, because that's the most predictable. People love predictable revenue, but sometimes it's not, not every business fits into that mold. Higher multiples are going to be where you are very successful in a specific channel or region, and you haven't expanded to the others because there's a cost to expand to the others. Sure. Super valuable because that's, something, so like some highly regulated companies are going to be like that, where if you have to get approvals from governmental organizations to go in, that takes time, money, expense. If there's logistical challenges to expanding beyond territories, those are ones where you can sort of say, because they can look at the full map and go, we can do that. We can accomplish those challenges. Those are probably some big ones. I mean, I think the other is, I'd say another is if you can really define why your product has breadth. And what I mean by breadth means, can you expand out from it? Does it logically make sense for you? Because you're really good at this product, you'll also be able to do this, because strategics love purchases that fill product lines for them. So like they have a hole. They're like really good at selling in this spectrum, but they're missing like a little piece of it. And if you're that little piece, they're willing to pay because they want to own that area of spectrum. Those would be the top ones I can think of. I'm sure there's others, but those ones drive.
Yeah, well, a couple that I come to mind from my side as well, because we do a lot of analytics for the buy and sell side on different businesses that we've helped sell. One which we weren't involved in, and I don't think they have been, but Stanley, just based on what you just talked about, the Stanley mugs or whatever that are all the rage if you're a 13-year-old girl. Those were sold to, construction workers. And so this isn't product expansion, but let's just say that you've been able to show that you can tap into a completely new market. Yes. That's another really good thing. Without product expansion, that you can tap into a completely new market, I think can help. And then another one that we ran into was value of a YouTube channel for a business. So this didn't have nearly as much of an impact, but it was something that we were able to use to help a little bit, where I don't remember exactly how to meet. It was 5 million subscribers, highly engaged audience on YouTube. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's, seen in the revenue, but it's like, if you separated that outside of that business, what's that entity itself worth as well? And there's a way to be able to use that to kind of bump up that multiple a little bit as well.
Exactly. I agree. That's super. I mean, like all of that new media, when you can be successful on TikTok, YouTube, wherever is most relevant to where your customers are. And then also in line with exactly what you're saying there is also sort of efficacy of advertising. When you can show that there's upspend available, that you've been increasing your advertising and you've seen the multiples hold, the ROAS hold, the everything hold. The idea going, well, we've churned this up. Well, we can still turn it more. We believe that we haven't addressed everybody in this vertical.
Yeah, that's huge. So you and I were talking a little bit about the market as a whole as well. So this is a little bit of a shift from where we're at right now, but let's just say your thoughts on the market for 2024. We've had a couple of rough years in e-commerce. I like to track, one of the things we like to track is the percentage of total retail sales that e-commerce takes up, right? And it was going up and up and up, and it has a really nice parabolic look to it. And then COVID happens, and there's this massive spike in 2020, 2021. It comes back down, but it still follows the same parabolic line that it was on. And so still going up. But that said, it still has been rough for some brands. 2024, good, bad. What do you think?
So one, I'll start from this is I was actually an economics major, and I love macroeconomics. I'm big and I follow it. And I also always tell people, you can try your best to use logic, numbers, but there's a lot that don't add up. So we're in a market right now where you go to the beginning of 2023 and you look at where inflation was, what the Fed funds rates increasing, and these things, which in a vacuum, which we don't live in a vacuum. This is what economists always are like, if we live, well, we don't live in a vacuum, so cool. Right. But if we did, you would expect to see a contraction. You'd expect to see, consumers not spend. You'd expect to see unemployment go up, and you'd expect to see that would be the softening that would then allow them to stop raising. Now, they kept raising because those things didn't happen. The consumer kept spending. And the consumer kept spending in the face of negative consumer outlook on the economy, which also very indicative in the past of future selling. So one thing I always say is that economics is very politics agnostic. So to me, when I look at it through that lens, I look at it very neutrally, like as opposed to in my personal life, I can have my own views. From an economic standpoint, one of the things I've seen is some of these feelings of like consumer sentiment have become an element that have become very politicized, where if you're on one side of the aisle or the other, you're going to say one or the other, and it doesn't match what you're seeing in front of you, where before the world wasn't that way. You actually differentiated. You could say, well, I'm making more, my car is cheaper, I don't think the world's in terrible shape. Now, if you don't like who's in power, it's terrible, and if you like who's in power, it's great. So I think there's some things there that we have to sort of start to learn, that some numbers that used to be indicative are no longer indicative because they're no longer doing what they used to try to prove. They're not showing what they used to show. What I think about 2024, I think there's several things. I think we've got a huge, number one, I tell companies like everything's going to be expensive. If you're a media buyer, everything gets more expensive. So don't come to me. I told all the companies I work with, I go, don't come to me and tell me that your Q3 and Q4 were thrown off because media is more expensive. Put it in your model. I guarantee you it's going to be more expensive. I don't care if you sell ice cream, which you think has nothing to do with, whoever wins the White House. The point is, It will be more expensive. So I always start from there and go, understand it's going to be a more expensive year on that front. Now, from the general economy,
totally agree.
I believed in a soft landing. So I've been saying that I believe there's a huge risk of a bad event. I said, but I'm more bullish on a soft landing, and this is like Q1 of last year, than others. Not that I said it was 100%, and not that I said the others were 0. I just said everyone else is saying 10%. I believe it's maybe 30 or 40, and maybe we're not looking through everything right. But the point is, all economists, we're going to hedge our bets. We're going to kind of tell you it might be this, it might be this, and it might be this. So whichever way it turns out, we're going to pull, from that. So I think it's going to be generally good. I generally believe in especially if we're talking US based, because another thing that people talk about economics, everybody just, well, Europe's got its economy, China's got an economy, everybody else has got an economy, the US has an economy, there's Latin America. But just looking at from US focus for the moment is, I think it's probably going to go up. I think that the institutions of our government don't like election year things to go down. So there's a lot of embedded things that will keep the economy sort of going. That being said, I think that in an election, there's this huge outcome that could really turn things on its head. And it's very hard to predict what that would do. So I think that's, unfortunately, the best I can do is I'm sort of saying I want us to be firm and solid so that we're ready if it's shaky or changed. But I want us to go forward with the confidence that I'm looking towards, especially with our portfolio companies. Like, we met with them in January, and they're going to look to sell sometime in 2025 or early 26. And I said, whatever happens, I'm very bullish on that. Like, if you're talking to me, whatever happens, we'll figure it out. Our institutions will balance. Things will still get done, and we'll move up. So I believe sort of in the 2-year horizon, we'll be good. There could be some real shocks and changes in Q4, and I'd be ready for anything. But overall, I would say I'm positive for the most part on the U.S. economy for the rest of the year.
Yeah. I appreciate that. I think the biggest key takeaway that I have from that in my own learnings and research and what you shared there too is we don't know, but it's a year to move forward with growth, but be prepared because the economy is still fragile and things could turn quickly. So just be ready. Continue focusing on your bottom line while you grow. But let's go ahead and start, pouring into this. And be prepared. I think the thing that you said there that we talk about a lot is during election years, so much money gets poured into advertising that ads are going to cost more during that time. So write that into your projections. And I think that's wise versus being surprised by it. So
That's
that
right.
we know is coming. That's going to happen this year, no matter what. So
Yeah, no matter
that's
what
less of an unknown.
That's right. That one's a known. That's like Donald Rumsfeld. That's a known. We know that one. We got that one good. But it's funny, you also hit on that, which is something that I do, which is I believe companies that are growing, that are losing money, it can be very advantageous for them. And so I understand it. So I don't not get that sometimes you're buying growth, right? That you're looking down the future and you want to get to scale for all sorts of reasons, right? Operational leverage, all real reasons, not baloney, but real. But one thing I say is the one thing I know is like the greatest companies can grow while they're making a profit, which is, I always say that to me, I break everything down to like the simplistic, because again, this is the economist to me, like, well, if I can pick pineapples at 5 per hour and you pick pineapples at 1 per hour, but you pick apples at 10 per hour and I pick them at 3 per hour, well, you know what? I should be picking pineapples, trade them with you for your apples. We're both going to get more of both goods.
Sure.
And we're going to sort of do this. That's to me what the great companies do, which is they are, and I say this a lot, but it's you're filling a customer's need. You have to understand what is if you're a true brand, not an e-commerce seller, but if you're a brand, you're solving a need, meeting a wish, or delighting a customer. And if you're doing that, your recompense should be the cost, everything it took you to do that, plus some winnings for you for doing that. And so if you're not growing when you're doing that, where you're taking something for yourself, 10%, let's say, I go, maybe you're not delighting as much as you want to be. And so maybe we need to change it. Whatever it is, or whatever the steps are. But like to me, I sort of get down and I go, I know people don't like hearing that because it's hard out there. Advertising is expensive. I'm having to spend 35% of my ticket on advertising and I can't make a profit. And I go, well, yes, you're right. You can't make a profit if you're spending 35% on your ticket on advertising. How about we look at it a different way? Why is your product priced there? And why is it so expensive to bring people there? It's one of the two things. And if you can lower your costs to build the product, then you're profitable. If you can raise the price, you're profitable. If you can take the advertising and go, I'm being inefficient with my advertising, you can be profitable. Solve one of those three, or all three, it's even better. But that's the conversation. And sometimes that's not always met with a resounding, thank you very much, Nick, for such pleasant news. But I don't know. I mean, it's kind of, it's the way it is, I think.
It is. Yep. This has been good. I want to transition into the personal side then of who is Nick Weiksner. Let's talk about childhood first. There were some things we talked about with childhood and sports, passion for inner city education. Tell me about your childhood and why you have this passion for inner city education.
Well, it's interesting. This is what I'm most passionate about. I've always said that the way I'll know I'm successful for real, like a real success, is if I could execute change and have inner city children access to adequate education. The reason being that from a very young age, I was lucky. My parents were well off, were comfortable, were not worried about things. But I grew up in New York, and so I lived in and amongst a wide range of people. And I played basketball actually up in the South Bronx in a citywide basketball league where I was the definite minority in terms of not being in there. And one of the things I saw is that, to me, education is the only way to break a cycle of socioeconomic issues that we have. And one of my problems is it's never been solved because it's not a fun solve. And what I mean by that is, if we were to invest and make it better, get better teachers, get better institutions, get better access and protections among it, the results are going to take 30 or 40 years, where that child makes it to college. They have a child who makes it to grad school. And then all of a sudden, the playing field is leveled. The playing field becomes the best and the brightest. I always say to people that I look at the world a lot in the way that I do with sports, which is,
love it.
When I walked onto a field, I played football in college. And when I walked onto that field, there was 100 players on the Duke football team, and they ranked you from 1 to 100. Literally, there was a board so you could know what number you are. And the point was, they didn't care anything about me. They cared about performance. Am I going to make the catch? Am I going to make the tackle? Am I going to do this? And they had no hindrance to where they're pulling their talent from. They pulled from everywhere. They took the best that they could. Now, the problem that I pose to people is I want our country having the best. And I don't necessarily believe that all of our best and brightest are actually coming up to the fore with the opportunity to make the amazing changes they might make given that change. So I've always been very passionate about saying education and sports, because for me, I was not a straight arrow. I mean, the people who know me, this doesn't shock them, but trouble was my middle name. I mean, I was just always in the principal's office. Sure. It just was the way it was. But I always wanted to play sports. So I always kept it, like my dad said, you kept it somewhere on the fairway, because I didn't want to lose my ability to play sports, because I knew if I went too far, that's what would be taken away from me. And so when I was in high school, I taught at Summerbridge, which is a program that takes kids from the South Bronx. It has kids from college and high school, teach them. We also do stuff, it's because it's a summer thing. So we also do there's some sports stuff and some fun things. And this is not a competitive sport, but sort of doing that. And I did that. And it opened my eyes to sort of, these kids were super gifted, because there was, you had to apply to get in. And the population, even though it came from the South Bronx, which is one of the most socioeconomically, hard hit areas that you can pull from, the kids were super smart. They often, 90% of them came from single mother households, and they were, making sure they were getting this, right? So they were going through all this effort to find this program, apply to the program, pass the test to get in. And then these kids were in there and getting this sort of education to sort of help them, where they would help them all the way through to high school to try to get, because they were trying to bridge the 4th to 9th grade, because that's where you lose a lot of kids in the inner city. And so I did that. And in college, I worked at a local elementary school in Durham. I went to Duke. So Durham had, some harder neighborhoods and a little bit of a different population, but equally as socioeconomically sort of hard hit. And basically all of it where I felt that wish we could do better. We don't have our best and brightest going into teaching. And I wish we should. Teachers are great. So it isn't that. I think the people that do go into teaching, they're phenomenal. They are working their tail off. They're doing an amazing job with limited resources. And so anyway, fast forward, I was working in investment banking, and I decided that I knew I wanted to go to Stanford Business School to do a search fund, very specific thing that Stanford offered at the time. And I realized that I should also want to do something for education. And, I've always said very honestly, I also understood that this would be good for me, because I knew that if I'm applying to Stanford, they would highly value that I went and I did this and that I have this passion. And so I'm like, that's good. Again, both people are getting something. So I went to Denver, and I taught at an inner city school. Bill and Melinda Gates had given $5 million to do a small school charter. So they're trying to get administration to be, class size was only 20. And each of the schools was 120 kids, where all the teachers then had weekly meetings where you're talking about, does Jill do well in my class, but not your class? Here's what I do to bring her in, right? To try to, all these best practices that you're trying to do. And then I also coached. So I coached basketball and baseball. And the nice part was I tied together as the freshman coach, and I taught ninth grade. I told the kids, there are very few people as competitive as me. As anyone who's played a board game with me can attest to. I will try to win however I can. Sure. But I also told them I care about them more than winning. And they were required to get 7 signatures a day from their teacher at the end of class. If they didn't have it, they didn't play. So if they lost it, they failed to get it, they didn't play. Now, could I have won a game or two more if I didn't have to? I'm sure I could have, right? But we were getting 90% of my kids to all of their classes when the school percentage was around 20. Attendance was about 20%. And the reason was they wanted to play basketball. They wanted to do that. And I said the way to do that is through this. And I think that's a great way to try to mix things that they want as that with others. And so, I mean, it was an amazing experience. I mean, I was pretty lucky. It was a school that Chauncey Billups, who NBA Hall of Famer, played for Detroit, child of Denver. You can't go anywhere. His brother was on the team. So I got to play. Chauncey came and did a scrimmage with us. And so I got to play with him, and, was amazing because he was
awesome.
Yeah. But you really just, the part that's sad is I left and went to business school. 2 years later, the school shut down. That they couldn't make it, even with this influx of capital. And the school was unable to provide what it is. So it closed down. Emmanuel High School in Denver, in 5 Points, closed down. And the kids have to go to other schools because the school wasn't able to handle it. So it just makes me think that, like, I wish there was an easy answer, because here you have Bill and Melinda Gates. I mean, giving $5 million is not nothing. And they do it to hundreds of schools. I mean, whatever, I don't know hundreds, but they do it a lot, right? They go out and the problem is their thoughts are right. Their heart's in the right place. I agree with some of the stuff, but there's more. The problem is bigger than just that. And, it's rough. And so that's the part I'd like to see change, where if there was one thing I could do that would get it, is it seems to me that in our country, we should be able to say that every kid through high school should have access to education and be able to learn and have a safe environment where it's not dangerous to go to school. But it's hard. I mean, it sounds, but it's hard.
It's simple, or it's simple to say, right? But it's the solution is complex. Exactly. It is simple in its idea, but very complex in understanding and what needs to happen. Yeah, in execution. Which is tough.
But yeah, so it's big, and that's my one that like my kids have all tutored. I mean, they've shared. Cool. This is they all tutor in the stuff because it's like I said, I believe in two things, which is sports is the great equalizer. Takes away all this stuff that we see in our society, rips it away. And education is another one that if we could get that'd be, and it would also make our country better. Like I said, think of how many Steve Jobses we've lost in the inner cities that he or she might have been that great, that great inventor. And like we've lost, like we definitely have at some point. I can guarantee that's happened, but it's hard, but it's also one that's hard to know how to do it, like how to change it and do it, because we've tried lots of solutions, trying to take kids from one neighborhood, have them go to school in another, that doesn't work. And we've tried different stuff, vouchers, and there's problems there, but it's sort of like, the antithesis of like the board meetings I like to run, which is I could sit here and talk to you about all the different problems, and my answer at the board meeting would be like, how about we talk about solutions? And the problem is I wish I had that solution, because I would talk about it and I don't. So I would love to find the person that does and find a way to support them in that endeavor. So
And I think similar to what we do in e-commerce, it's A/B testing, right? We just need more of these tests. And so we ran that test. Okay, great. Can we do this in a systematic approach to figure out what's actually working and then being able to use that to apply that? A lot of people that speak with loud voices about what they think needs to happen here, but not necessarily the right ideas. I'm fine with testing out many of those ideas, but let's do it in a controlled way so we can actually see if it makes a difference, and let's roll those out then.
Yep.
I don't have a good transition for this next
No,
one.
there's no good
there isn't I don't know how to segue from that, but you told me a story about, sometimes I like to ask about famous encounters or things like that. Your friend dated Jerry Seinfeld.
Yeah.
I got to know more about this story. What's going on with this?
So in high school, my good friends were big party promoters, right? So this is the early 90s. It was right when this stuff was sort of taking off. In fact, one of them is Jason Strauss, and he's the CEO of Tao Group. So people who've been to Vegas, he has them on not every continent, but he has them Australia, Europe. Anyway, he and I were football captains together in high school. And anyway, a big party promoter. He started doing it in high school, which, sidebar, I turned down. So I don't want to work in the nightclub industry. And now I see how much is going on there. I realize perhaps I should have been a little more open to saying this is a pretty cool business to be involved in. But sideways, she was another friend of ours, our group, in New York City. A lot of the kids that go to school there. And so she's another one. And so she's dating Jerry Seinfeld. And, for this, we'll say she was 18. And so we're out, and he comes, into the bar, and it's actually a bar that I used to bartend at. We'll say I was 21. And so I walk over and just go, hey, Jerry, here, I'll get you a pitcher of beer, and I'll bring it over here. And he was pretty funny, man. He just went in the corner, and he really didn't want to talk to sort of anyone. And I'm not someone who likes to bother people. I'm not going to, sort of do it. I brought over the free, not that he needed free beer. So, I get that too. It wasn't like I'm, he showed up in his Porsche parked out front. I was pretty sure he could, but anyway, I gave it to him. He didn't really want to talk. And then I was talking to the girl who was dating, who was a good friend of mine. And she was like, he doesn't he feels that if he's talking to people, it's hard for him, because it's he has to be fun. And I'm sure he is very funny. Sure. I've seen enough Seinfeld, enough Curb Your Enthusiasm to know that I'm imagining he and Larry David are pretty incisive, pretty smart,
right? Very
smart, and do it. But I get it. He didn't really want to talk around us. And then the part that cracked us up is we kept getting him on lists into the club that he wanted to go to, and so he enjoyed that part of it. And they actually didn't date that long. They dated a couple months. I don't remember. It wasn't a huge thing, but it was definitely a buzz of at the time. This is 1993, and so we're talking, right in the middle of Seinfeld's run.
Right.
He was dominant. He was dominant. There was no doubting who he is, and he's very recognizable. He looks just like he looks.
Nick, this has been wonderful. I've enjoyed getting to know you personally. I've enjoyed you sharing your wisdom with us. If there was one more piece of advice that you want to give to D2C brands that are looking to be acquired, what's that final resting piece of advice?
I would say have your business match your passion and meet your customers where their needs are, and you're going to win, would be my end of the day.
Brilliant. If people want to follow you or they want to work with you, what's the best way for them to get in touch?
Easiest way to get in touch with me is email me. It's Nick, and it's at South Col, which is SouthCol.co. Just to understand, South Col is the final face of Everest. So we're named very specifically. The entrepreneurs brought their brand all the way up the mountain. We just view ourselves as trying to help that entrepreneur up the last technical piece to get to that summit, which is Everest, and that exit. So that's what South Col is. And so my email is just nick@southcol.com. And that's why you see mountains in the background of everything we produce, because we lean into being the Sherpa to help help people get up the mountain. So we lean into our brand story, as I'm sure all of you with great brands out there do as well. And so, yeah, that's the easiest way. You can always visit us on the web too, which is just southcol.co. And we have all our information there and can be emailed from there as well. But those are the easiest. And you'll get me. I'm happy to talk to anybody who's out there. It's always valuable. I learned so much about all the brands and value the discussion, and hopefully I'm able to return value by either introduction or working or doing anything else, because it's we're all in this. It's a huge industry that there's a lot of room for a lot of winners, and we just love working with these great entrepreneurs.
Awesome. Well, Nick, you've been an excellent Sherpa for us today. I appreciate that. And thank you, everyone, for listening. Have a great day.
Thanks for listening to the Up Arrow podcast with William Harris. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.